So a little while ago, I interviewed Phoebe, one of my student athletes. And if you didn't see that video, you should check that out because I was trying to elicit some ideas from her on what it is that we as coaches can do to help provide the best experience possible for our players. And what I said in that video and since then is, it's important for us as coaches to make sure that we do this. We ask our players, for some insight and just to get their idea on how things are going. I think sometimes we as coaches, I don't know if afraid might be too strong a word, but we don't always necessarily want to hear, what's going on, because maybe for fear of finding out, it's not as great as I think it is. Or they're not having the kind of experience necessarily that I'm hoping they're having. And so why wouldn't we want to ask them about that, right? But we're human, and at times we do struggle with that. But today I want to talk about, just briefly, I'm not going to be able to go into this as much. I think I'll probably end up doing, a few different ones on this. In fact, I've thought about a variety of ways to present this topic. But I want to talk about something that Phoebe brought up when she was, when we were talking with one another in that video. And that is the concept of coaching your own kid and the dynamic that creates. I had to do it. I'm sure many of you, I say had to do it. I loved doing it. I wanted to do it. Of course, I've been a coach so much longer than I'd been a parent that it just felt natural for me to do that. But I'm sure many of you have coached your own child or will coach your own child or children. And it can be a great experience. It can be an outstanding thing for you guys to share. It's still some of my favorite memories of my life were being able to coach my son and all of his friends who, had been his friends for quite some time. And so that was an absolute blast. But there are some pitfalls and some landmines that you have to be able to navigate and be careful of. Right? And so the first thing to consider is this: no matter how hard you try, you are going to have people say you're favoring your kid, no matter what you do. And I'll say this, I think most of us are harder on our own kid than we are on the others. And quite honestly, I've taught, when I've done presentations, to schools and talked about this concept or written about it, that's not fair to your kid. It's also not fair to the other kids, because some of you are thinking, I'm harder on them so they know he's not getting away or she's not getting away with something. And then, so the other kids might be like, okay, yeah, he really, but they might also be thinking, boy, he doesn't really treat him or her very well, but also, why don't I get coached that hard? How come I don't get pushed like that? Some of them want that. So you have to be very careful with how you do this. But so, the first thing is no matter what you do, you're going to have people who think you're being easier on your kid and your kid is getting favors. You can't control that. You can control it by making sure you don't favor your kid over others and set everything up for your kid, much like what Phoebe talked about that day. Here she's a player who feels that sometimes her coaches have given the benefit of the doubt to their own child and let them play in positions that they really weren't suited for. Okay, now let's keep in mind she was a 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl, 8th grade girl who's been playing her sport. I'm assuming she was talking soccer. That's where her real sport is. She's been playing it since she's little. So, at what age was this happening? And so I get it. She classic case of kids may often see things differently than we as coaches. So absolutely that could have happened. But still, that's her perspective on it. And so understand your kids are going to have a perspective on this too. Whether it's, the right one, that's probably not the right way to put it, but whether it's what, the perspective you would be hoping they would be having, they're going to have a perspective. So you need to do all you can to make sure that they get the proper perspective, and the proper perception is probably a better word, of what really is going on. So you need to do all you can to not favor your kid, but you have to at the very same time understand you're not going to have control over people thinking you are or not. Secondly, you need to try to treat them all the same. Again, there's very little in sports that's equal, okay? But you need to treat them all fairly and consistently and equally in terms of how you treat kids, right? And some of that is like what Phoebe was talking about, positions and who gets to do what and all that, and who gets certain responsibilities and all. Make sure that you're balancing that out as much as possible, but treat them all fairly and consistently. Here's one of the reasons I loved coaching my own son is when I coached him, I couldn't necessarily be dad. I was still his dad, but it was different than when I'm up in those stands. And I totally get this. We watch the game as coaches differently than parents watch the game. And I've said this in presentations at schools for years, to coaches and to parents. Understand that we're both looking at it differently. When I look out on the floor as a basketball coach, I see 5 kids, okay? And when my kid was out there, I had to look at it and see it that way too. When I'm sitting in the stands watching him play, I see 1 + 4. And the 1 is Technicolor HD, and he's perfect, right? And so I as a coach, I can't do that. So if you are coaching your child, you cannot coach your child as a parent. They all have to be equal. They all have to be the same. And so you need to treat them that way. That leads me to the third point. How are you treating your own child versus how you're treating all of them? Again, you should be fairly consistent with all of them, right? And not show favoritism, but also not be harder on yours than the others either, because I'll go back to what I said earlier. That's going to do 2 things. One, that's not fair to your son or your daughter. You're being harder on them just because they're your kid. You're doing that for you, all right? You're doing that to make you look a certain way. Right? This is about your kids, all of your kids, okay? 2, if I'm another player on that team and I want to be pushed hard and I see you treating your child and pushing your child harder, I might be thinking, well, how come I don't get pushed like that? I want to get that good. Let's face it, a lot of times coaches' kids are really good players, right? And so they're looked on as better players. Well, one of the ways that that's going to happen is the teammates are going to go, I want to get that good. How come I'm not getting treated that way? So you got to be careful there too, all right? And then finally, I think the ultimate thing is something that I talk about all the time with coaches in all realms, and that is the communication is absolutely key. You have to communicate clearly to your kids, to your own child, and to the parents of all of them about this situation. Be upfront with it, get it out there, let them know, yes, I have a child on the team, but tell them, I'm going to treat them all equally, I'm going to treat them all consistently and fairly. If there is ever a question about whether or not that's happening, please come tell me. I'd rather we talk about it than you be sitting in the stands talking about it, because I can't fix some issue if I don't know about it. And I'm a human being. I think I'll be very consistent and treat them all fairly. My child might play a lot. My child might not play a lot. I'm going to play kids the way that I feel is best for our success. Tell them that. And then say, if you're having an issue with that, please don't sit up in the stands and complain about it and talk to each other. Please include me. So again, opening that line of communication, which I think in the last video I talked a little bit, not the one with Phoebe, but in a different one. If not, it's coming, because communication is as big a thing as we must learn to master in coaching as anything else. And I'm going to be doing quite a bit on that this year in videos and blog posts and probably in my podcast. So anyway, just something for you about coaching your own kid. More on this coming at other times, because this is a big topic that I want to address and deal with. So, all right, we'll talk to you again next time.